something unusual happens to sensitive souls in America's achievement-driven world. Not a breakdown that arrives loudly, but a quiet folding inward, a soft collapse that hides itself beneath daily responsibilities and practiced smiles. Most people never notice it. The schedule still gets followed. The deadlines still get met. The work still appears solid from the outside. Yet underneath the surface, a fine crack spreads through the inner life, widening in places no one else can see. Achievement culture praises the ones who never slow down. It rewards the person who keeps moving, even when their spirit begs for breath. It treats constant productivity like a badge of honor, a kind of moral superiority. Sensitive souls sense the cost long before the collapse shows. Their bodies pick up the tension that others ignore. Their minds absorb more stimulation than they can release. Their hearts feel the weight of expectations meant for steel, not for skin. A strange message echoes through this culture. Be more, faster, better, always. Anything less feels like failure, even when the body quietly whispers for rest. Sensitive souls hear that whisper clearly, but achievement culture teaches them to distrust it. So they override their nature again and again until the override becomes a way of living. The collapse does not come from weakness. It comes from pretending the cost does not exist. It comes from absorbing what others deflect. It comes from sensing the emotional weather of a society that never stops storming. Every fall has a moment of clarity before it happens. A brief recognition that the environment demands a rhythm no human nervous system can sustain forever. Sensitive souls do not collapse because they are fragile. They collapse because they feel the truth too honestly to keep running from it. America's achievement culture runs like a massive industrial machine. Every part is designed to keep the system moving. Every hour, every task, every ounce of energy must fit neatly into its rhythm. People grow up believing they must become efficient components of this machinery or risk being left behind. Sensitive souls feel the weight of this far more intensely than others. The machine does not slow down. It expects constant motion from everyone inside it. It speaks through schedules, performance reviews, competitive classrooms, and the endless hum of busyness. What passes for normal here is simply pressure with a polished face. Rest becomes an interruption. Stillness feels suspicious. Depth is treated like inefficiency. Sensitive souls carry a different wiring. Their nervous systems respond to subtle shifts the machine cannot measure. A slight rise in tension affects them. A sharp tone in someone's voice lingers in their chest. A crowded room drains their energy faster than they can rebuild it. These reactions are not flaws. They are signs of a finely tuned instrument trying to survive in an environment built for steel. The industrial metaphor becomes clearer the longer you watch. Most people adapt by numbing themselves. The machine rewards this numbness with promotions and praise. Those who ignore their emotions the longest are often seen as the strongest. Sensitive souls cannot numb without losing themselves. Their inner world refuses to flatten itself into efficiency. The depth they carry becomes a liability in a culture that values speed over understanding. Imagine placing a delicate glass sensor on a conveyor belt meant for heavy metal parts. The sensor is not weaker than the steel. It is simply meant for a different environment. Yet the machine treats both objects the same. The sensor cracks under pressures designed for materials that feel nothing. This is what happens to sensitive souls inside America's achievement culture. They respond to every vibration, every shift in pace, every emotional tremor around them. Over time, the internal strain becomes impossible to ignore. The culture insists that achievement equals worth. Children learn this before they understand themselves. Adults carry it into their careers and relationships. Life becomes a race with no finish line and no moment to pause. Sensitive people try to keep up, thinking the problem is their lack of endurance. But endurance has nothing to do with it. Their collapse comes from treating their emotional intelligence as an inconvenience instead of an asset. The machine demands sameness. Sensitive souls bring nuance, reflection, empathy, and softness. These qualities do not fit neatly into the gears. When they try to compress themselves into the machine's shape, something essential goes missing. Not productivity, humanity. The tragedy is not that sensitive souls fail. The tragedy is that the culture does not recognize what they offer. And until someone sees this clearly, the machine continues to grind down those who were never built to be parts of it. Life inside America's achievement culture wears down a sensitive soul in ways that rarely show on the surface. The body notices it first, a tightening beneath the collarbone, a heaviness behind the eyes, a quiet urge to withdraw even when nothing dramatic is happening. The world hums at a volume that feels just a little too loud, and the nervous system registers every note. Workplaces amplify this hum. Fluorescent lights buzz overhead. Conversations run fast and sharp. People talk in clipped sentences as if every moment must serve a purpose. Small requests feel like sudden gusts of wind. Unexpected changes hit the chest with more force than most would ever believe. Sensitive souls breathe through these moments, hoping the tremor will pass before anyone notices. A person named Sarah once described her morning ritual. She would sit in her car outside the office and prepare herself not for the work, but for the environment. The noise, the urgency, the endless sense of being slightly behind. 1 minute of stillness before stepping into a space that felt more like a battlefield than a workplace. She excelled at her job. She was dependable, thoughtful, thorough. Yet every evening she returned home feeling as though she had run a marathon no one else had felt. Matthew had a different story, but the same shape. He worked in a fast-paced tech company where each day brought new targets and tighter deadlines. Co-workers thrived on the rush. He watched them move through chaos with excitement, as if intensity gave them life. His experience was the opposite. The noise inside his head grew louder than the noise around him. Thoughts scattered, heart raced, focus fractured under the sheer pressure of constant acceleration. Nothing about it was dramatic enough to call breakdown, but the toll was steady, unmistakable, and cumulative. Sensitive souls live with a heightened awareness of emotional undercurrents. When a colleague walks into the room with silent frustration, they feel it. When a supervisor masks disappointment behind polite language, they sense the tension beneath the surface. Their bodies pick up signals the culture teaches them to ignore. Over time, this constant reception becomes a burden, not because empathy is heavy, but because the world gives them no space to release what they absorb. Daily life becomes a balancing act, trying to meet expectations without collapsing under them, trying to stay present without drowning in the overstimulation, trying to maintain calm while the outer world insists on speed. The exhaustion that follows isn't laziness. It's the natural result of pushing a finely tuned inner life through an environment designed for those who feel less. Something subtle begins to shift inside. Moments of joy become harder to access. Moments of stillness feel like rare luxuries. Even simple tasks begin to carry an invisible weight. Sensitive souls start wondering if the fault lies within them. But nothing is wrong with their nature. The misalignment comes from living in a culture that measures success by output, while ignoring the quiet depth that gives life meaning. Several invisible forces inside America's achievement culture slowly wear down sensitive souls. These forces do not announce themselves. They operate quietly, shaping behavior, shaping expectations, shaping the very idea of what it means to be a successful human being. Understanding them is the only way to see why certain people collapse long before others even notice anything is wrong. The first force hides inside the myth of endless productivity. The culture equates motion with value. People rush from task to task, believing they are building a meaningful life when they are often only fueling the machine that demands more every year. The tragedy emerges when sensitive souls absorb this expectation and attempt to function like perpetual engines. Their bodies never fully rest. Their thoughts never fully settle. Even moments of quiet become contaminated by guilt, because the mind whispers that any pause is irresponsible. A nervous system built for depth cannot thrive under constant acceleration. Another force takes shape through the reward loop. America praises achievement with such intensity that the praise becomes addictive. A completed project brings recognition. Recognition brings more work. More work brings validation. The cycle looks like success, but it quietly traps the sensitive person in a pattern where they abandon their inner needs to maintain external approval. The collapse often begins when the praise stops satisfying them. What once felt energizing starts feeling hollow because their true selves were never part of the chase. A third force appears in the way emotions are handled. The culture treats emotional expression as weakness. Strength is linked with restraint. Professionalism means composure under pressure, even when that composure requires self-erasure. Sensitive souls are built to feel, not suppress. Their emotional clarity becomes a burden inside an environment that rewards stoicism over honesty. When emotions are repeatedly pushed down, the body eventually holds the weight. Tight shoulders, clenched stomachs, trembling hands. These are not signs of fragility. They are signs of a person carrying more than any human is meant to carry alone. Comparison creates another invisible wound. People are taught to measure their lives next to timelines, achievements, incomes, and milestones that may have nothing to do with their true nature. Sensitive souls experience comparison not as motivation but as pressure that threatens their sense of identity. Their nervous systems respond with anxiety because every comparison feels like a subtle message that they are falling behind. The culture never admits that each person's path unfolds at its own pace. It treats life as a race, and sensitive souls eventually realize they were never meant to sprint. A fifth force comes from the distortion of rest. The culture glorifies exhaustion. It frames burnout as dedication. Anyone who steps back is viewed as unfocused or unambitious. Rest becomes a privilege rather than a human necessity. Sensitive people need rest, not as escape, but as oxygen. Their depth, intuition, and creativity require spaciousness. When the culture denies that spaciousness, their inner world begins to collapse from lack of air. There is also a deeper influence that rarely gets named. Achievement culture operates on external metrics. Sensitive souls operate on internal truth. One system values output. The other values meaning. When these systems clash, the sensitive person feels torn between who they are and who the culture demands them to be. This internal conflict becomes a quiet erosion of identity. No single moment causes the collapse. It happens through thousands of small compromises, each one pulling them further from their natural rhythm. A final force sits at the heart of the machine. The culture insists that the highest form of life is a productive one. Sensitive souls know, without being taught, that the highest form of life is a meaningful one. And meaning cannot grow in a life that never stops long enough to breathe. Their collapse becomes a message, not a failure. A warning that the structure itself is unsustainable for anyone who feels deeply. A deeper truth begins to appear when the collapse finally arrives. Sensitive souls do not break because they are weak. They break because they have been absorbing more than any inner world should be asked to hold. The culture misreads this collapse as fragility, but the collapse is actually clarity. It exposes the mismatch between a nervous system built for depth and a society built for speed. A new image helps reveal what is really happening. Think of a delicate crystal vessel carried through a violent storm. The glass is not flawed. It is crafted with precision, meant to reflect light, meant to hold beauty, meant to respond to the slightest change in temperature. Yet when placed in winds meant for iron, the vessel trembles, not from weakness, but from sensitivity to forces far too harsh for its nature. The world misunderstands the trembling because the world only respects materials that can survive a storm by becoming harder. Crystal survives by staying true to what it is, not by pretending to be metal. Achievement culture demands that everyone become iron. The pace, the pressure, the constant measurement, everything serves the expectation that resilience must come from thick armor and emotional indifference. Sensitive people carry a different kind of resilience, one built on awareness rather than force. Their strength comes from reflection, intuition, empathy, and the ability to sense the subtle. These qualities are powerful, yet they operate poorly inside storms that reward numbness over perception. The collapse, when viewed through this new lens, becomes a moment of revelation. It is the crystal vessel recognizing that the storm was never its natural environment. It is the nervous system refusing to survive at the cost of its own integrity. It is the soul saying enough, even when the mind has been trained to keep going. This reframing shifts the entire narrative. The problem was never the sensitivity. The problem was the expectation that a sensitive person should function like someone who feels less. Something profound happens when the collapse is no longer seen as failure. Space opens within the self. Breath returns. The inner world finally has permission to exist without justification. Sensitive souls begin to realize that their depth is not a liability, but a form of intelligence that cannot flourish in an environment built around constant acceleration. Their emotional clarity becomes a compass rather than a burden. Their intuition becomes a guide rather than a distraction. Sensitivity stops feeling like something to hide and begins to feel like something that was always meant to be honored. The crystal vessel metaphor offers another insight. When taken out of the storm and placed where it belongs, the same vessel that once trembled begins to shine. Light moves through it effortlessly. Colors glow in places no one noticed before. The thing that seemed fragile under violent winds becomes extraordinary in calm air. The collapse becomes an invitation to seek that calm, not as escape, but as alignment. Achievement culture teaches that identity must be built from accomplishments. Sensitive souls discover another truth after the collapse. Identity grows from authenticity, from choosing environments that support their nature rather than punish it, from learning that worth does not depend on how much pressure they can withstand, from recognizing that a nervous system built for depth will never find peace inside a machinery built for constant output. This shift is not about giving up. It is about waking up. A sensitive soul is not failing the world. The world is failing to understand the kind of strength sensitivity contains. Once this truth settles, the collapse no longer feels like the end. It feels like the beginning of a return. Daily life becomes gentler the moment a sensitive soul stops trying to harden themselves for a world that refuses to slow down. No dramatic change is needed. Only small shifts in awareness. These shifts create room for breath, room for clarity, room for the self that has been pushed aside by endless demands. A simple practice begins with noticing. Noticing the moment tension rises. Noticing how the chest tightens when expectations grow heavier. Noticing how the body reacts before the mind has time to explain anything. This noticing is not meant to fix the discomfort. It exists to reveal the truth of the experience. A sensitive nervous system speaks quietly, and attention is the only language it understands. Another practice takes place in a single minute of stillness. 1 minute without input. 1 minute without reaching for a screen or replaying a conversation. 1 minute to let the inner world settle. The mind often believes it needs an entire day of silence to recover, but 1 minute can shift the direction of an entire afternoon. Stillness restores far more than effort ever does. There is also value in writing down the expectations that shape the day, not as a plan, but as a recognition. Many of these expectations were adopted unconsciously from a culture that praises overextension. Seeing them on the page exposes their weight. Some lose their power immediately. Others reveal themselves as obligations that no longer belong to the person carrying them. A sensitive soul does not need a new identity. They need permission to live according to the one they already have. This permission grows each time they choose environments that support their nature. It grows when they slow down without apologizing. It grows when they let rest be a necessity rather than a reward. Life changes the moment a sensitive person stops forcing themselves into shapes that do not match their inner truth. Not because the world becomes easier, but because the self becomes clearer. Clarity offers its own kind of strength, one that does not depend on endurance or perfection. It depends on alignment. The practices are small. The effects are profound. Awareness softens the pressure. Stillness steadies the breath. Honesty returns the soul to itself. The great industrial machine of achievement continues to roar in the background, moving at the same relentless speed it always has. Conveyor belts still run. The gears still grind. The noise still fills the air. Yet something shifts when a sensitive soul steps away from the belt and realizes the sound was never meant to dictate the rhythm of their life. Distance offers clarity. From a few steps back, the machine looks less like a measure of human worth and more like a structure built from fear. Fear of slowing down, fear of being left behind, fear of being seen as anything other than productive. Sensitive souls begin noticing how many people inside the machine have forgotten they are human at all. The crystal vessel metaphor returns here. With new meaning, a vessel pulled out of the storm does not lose its ability to shine. Light touches its surface with a softness the storm never allowed. Colors once hidden by trembling now reveal themselves. The vessel reflects the world instead of resisting it. The same sensitivity that once felt like a burden becomes a source of quiet brilliance. A different image begins to form. Life outside the machinery moves with a gentler pulse. Birdsong replaces the mechanical hum. Natural rhythms replace artificial urgency. Sensitive souls rediscover a truth their bodies always knew. Human life was never meant to follow the pace of a machine. Human spirit was never designed to function under the pressure of constant acceleration. Stepping away does not mean rejecting the world. It means returning to it, returning to breath, returning to presence, returning to the simple beauty of experiencing life without turning every moment into an opportunity for performance. This return restores something the machine took, the sense that being alive is enough. A quiet insight rises from this restoration. Sensitive souls were never meant to compete with the storm. They were meant to reveal what the storm cannot touch: softness, depth, awareness, the capacity to see the sacred in places the machine overlooks. When this understanding settles, the collapse no longer defines them. The collapse becomes a doorway. It marks the moment the soul chooses itself over the machine. It marks the moment the vessel stops trembling and begins to shine again. There comes a moment, after all the noise and pressure fade into the distance, when a sensitive soul realizes something simple. Life feels different when it is no longer lived as a race. Breath deepens. Thoughts soften. The inner world begins to move at its own natural pace again. This final space is not a conclusion. It is an opening, an invitation to walk through the day with a little more awareness than yesterday. Awareness of when the body tenses. Awareness of when the heart whispers for rest. Awareness of when the mind tries to force itself back into the shape of the machine. No need to fix anything. No need to reinvent yourself. Just notice. Noticing is enough to change the direction of a life that has been moving too fast for too long. Take this reflection with you for the next few hours. Carry it gently, the way a crystal vessel is carried through calm air. Let it sit beside you during your next conversation, your next decision, your next moment of quiet. You may find that a new kind of clarity emerges when the pressure to perform finally lifts. If something in this message felt true, let it echo in your day. Let it guide the small choices, the pauses, the breaths that help you return to yourself. There will always be another reflection to explore, another moment of seeing more clearly, another step toward living from the inside out. For now, allow this awareness to breathe with you. That alone is enough.